Have you ever been thrown away by the same hands you once fed? The same hands you once held when they trembled as children? Sometimes life doesn't break with a loud crash. Sometimes it just forgets you. And that silence, that quiet kind of pain, becomes louder than any scream you could ever make. Hello, my dear ones. Before I begin, thank you for sitting with me tonight. If it's not too much to ask, would you tell me where you're listening from and maybe what time it is, where you are? Because where I am, the clock just hit 7:43 in the evening and I can still smell the rain outside my small window. It's funny then how life teaches us to start again, even after everything we've lost. My name is Lulama Moyo, and once, a long time ago, I was a wife, a mother, a homemaker, the woman who made sure everyone else was fed, warm, and safe. Now I'm the woman people walk past on the street without even turning their heads. But this is not a story about pity. It's a story about rebirth. Because sometimes the people who bury you are the same ones who teach you how to rise. I was 32 when I gave birth to my only child, Thandi. She was the joy of my life, my little sunflower. I used to tell her, one day you'll stand taller than me. And she did. She studied hard, worked harder, and grew into the kind of woman who wore perfume that cost more than my week's groceries. I was proud, maybe too proud. Her father passed away early, heart failure, and I never remarried. I told myself that my life was complete as long as I had Thandi. We had each other, or at least I thought we did. As years passed, she began to change. Her laughter turned into measured smiles, her warm hugs into polite nods. She started saying things like, "Mama, you don't have to cook for me anymore. I'll order something." Or, "You don't need to come to my office. It's not really your kind of place." Those words, they weren't meant to hurt. But they did, because they carried a message she didn't have the courage to say out loud. I was no longer part of her world. Then came that day. I still remember the smell of rain and the taste of salt in my tears. She arrived with her husband, tall man, sharp suit, soft eyes that looked anywhere but mine. They stood in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had cooked for them 100 times. Thandi avoided my gaze. Then she said in a voice that sounded borrowed, "Mama, I found a place for you. It's better for you. You'll have people your age. You'll be taken care of." At first I thought she meant a small apartment, somewhere peaceful. But when I saw the van outside with the word shelter printed on its side, my heart froze. I tried to laugh. "You mean we're visiting someone there?" But her silence was the answer. And that silence, it burned deeper than fire. They said it was temporary, that I'd be more comfortable. But as I stepped inside that gray building and the door closed behind me, I knew what temporary meant. It meant forgotten. The first night was the hardest. I sat on a creaky metal bed with a thin blanket that smelled like cleaning soap. The woman beside me snored loudly, her breath heavy with old pain. I looked at the window, a small square of light, and whispered, "God, if this is how my story ends, please let it end soon." But it didn't end. The next morning, I woke up and met Mama Keza, the woman who would change everything for me. She was tough, loud, and always chewing on something that smelled like mint and trouble. When she saw me crying into my tea, she laughed and said, "You know, the tears don't sweeten it, darling. You better drink before it gets cold." I almost hated her for that, but then I realized she wasn't mocking me. She was waking me up. Days turned into weeks. I swept the corridors, folded sheets, and helped in the kitchen just to keep myself busy. And every evening I'd sit by the window with my hands empty. I wasn't used to them being empty. They had always been cooking, cleaning, sewing, serving. Now they just existed. Until one day they found something again. I remember the smell of the herbs outside the shelter, wild mint, lemongrass, and hibiscus growing through cracks in the pavement. I began to pick them, just a few at first, to make tea for myself and the others. Mama Keza teased, "You think you're some kind of herbal doctor now?" I smiled and said, "No, I just want something warm that doesn't taste like sadness. That's how it began. One pot of tea, one cup at a time. I would dry the herbs near the window, crush them gently with my hands, and mix them with slices of dried fruit the kitchen staff threw away. People began to notice. They'd say, "Lulama, your tea smells like sunshine," or, "Can you make that again tomorrow?" So I did. Not for money, not even for praise, but because it made me feel human again. Then one afternoon, while I was serving tea, a young boy appeared at the door. He had eyes just like Thandi's, and when he called out, "Go-go?" my heart nearly stopped. It was Sibusiso, my grandson. He ran into my arms, whispering, "Mama doesn't know I'm here. I missed you." That day I realized something beautiful. Love, real love, always finds its way home. Sibusiso began to visit secretly every weekend. He'd bring me dried fruits, little paper bags of sugar, and once, a small phone. He said, "Gogo, you should post your tea online. People love this stuff now," I laughed. "Me? Online? I can't even unlock this thing without it yelling at me." He grinned. "Then I'll do it for you." So he took photos of my hands mixing herbs, of the steam rising from the cups, of Mama Kiza pretending to be a customer. He made a small page called Moyo Blends. He said it meant heart blends, because everything I made came straight from mine. That night, for the first time in years, I prayed not for death, but for tomorrow, because something inside me had changed. I no longer wanted to be invisible. I wanted to see how far a woman could go when the world had already decided she was done. And somewhere deep inside that shelter, that place where broken hearts went to sleep, something new was waking up. A dream, small, trembling, but alive. Because when they left me, they forgot one thing. They left me with myself. And that, my dear ones, is where the real story begins. Have you ever felt the world testing you just to see if you'll break again? It's strange. When people think you're finished, life begins whispering a new song. It doesn't come loud or dramatic. It starts like a hum, low, patient, waiting for you to believe in it. The morning after Sibusiso posted those photos, I woke up early. The sun was still crawling over the roof of the shelter, dripping gold onto the cracked walls. I didn't expect anything to happen, but when I checked the phone he left for me, there were messages, hundreds of tiny dots of kindness blinking across the screen. Comments from strangers saying, "Your hands remind me of my grandmother's," or "Where can I taste that tea?" I didn't know what to do. I'd never had an audience before. So I did what felt right. I brewed more tea. By noon, I carried my little kettle to the corner of the shelter where the old iron fence met the main road. The space was barely wide enough for 2 chairs and a table I borrowed from the common room. But it was mine. I wiped the dust off the table, placed a few jars of dried herbs, and hung a hand-painted board that read, "Moyo Blends, from my heart to yours." People stared as they walked by. Some smiled politely, others whispered and kept walking. To them, I was just another old woman trying to sell nostalgia in paper cups. But to me, it was a beginning, the first time I'd ever built something with my own name on it. The first day, I sold 2 cups of tea, one to a street cleaner and one to a woman from the shelter who said she wanted to taste hope. She didn't have to pay. I told her hope is free. The second day, no one came. The third, a group of teenagers laughed as they passed by, calling me Tea Grandma. And the fourth, the rain came down so hard that my signboard bled blue paint onto the ground. I stood there, drenched and trembling, thinking, maybe Thandi was right. Maybe I am just an old fool. That night, I sat on my narrow bed, watching the raindrops crawl down the window. Mama Keza shuffled in with her shawl, humming like she always did. When she saw me crying, she sighed, "Ah, child, you want to be loved by the same world that forgot you. That's your mistake." I looked at her, confused. She smiled and said, "You don't sell tea, Lulama. You sell peace. People will come when they're tired enough to need it. Those words, they stuck in my chest. And the next morning I went back out, because she was right. I wasn't just boiling leaves, I was boiling stories. So I began to tell them. Every person who stopped for tea, I gave them a story with their cup. About my grandmother, who used to say, "Don't rush your sip, the soul needs slow warmth." About how lemongrass teaches patience and hibiscus reminds you to forgive. About the taste of memory itself, bittersweet and beautiful. Soon people didn't just come for tea. They came to listen. A young woman who worked in an office nearby began stopping by every morning. She said, "Your tea keeps me calm before meetings." An older man, a taxi driver, said, "It tastes like home, even though home's gone." And slowly, faces became familiar. Coins turned into notes, and my little corner, that forgotten piece of pavement, began to smell like belonging. But success, no matter how small, never comes without whispers. Some people didn't like seeing an old woman turning attention into something steady. One afternoon, a man from a nearby store sneered, "Why waste time, Granny? No one's going to make a business out of leaves." I smiled and said softly, "Then don't waste time watching me." He left, but his laughter stayed behind like an echo. Still, I didn't stop. Every evening I'd dry fruits in the back kitchen, mango, guava, sometimes apple. The shelter's cook, a kind man named Patrick, let me use the oven after dinner. He'd shake his head and say, "You've got stubbornness, Lulama." I like that. I told him, "It's not stubbornness. It's memory." A few months passed. Sibusiso kept helping me with the online page, updating photos and writing small captions in his way. Tea made by love, brewed by history. I didn't understand hashtags, but he did. And one night I saw something strange. A message from a man named Tariq Mensa. He said he was a food vlogger who'd seen my page and wanted to visit. I didn't know what that meant, but Cebu's eyes lit up like festival lights. "Go, he has 1 million followers." I laughed. "Then tell him to bring his own cup. I can't afford fancy ones." A week later, Tariq arrived. He wore a denim jacket and had a camera strapped to his chest. When he walked up, I thought he looked too young to know what real hunger felt like. But the moment he tasted the tea, he went silent. He closed his eyes and said, This tastes like a story." I smiled. "It is." He recorded a short video, just 5 minutes long. I didn't think much of it. But that night, my phone began to buzz nonstop. Cebu called, screaming, Go, you're viral! Over 1 million views!" I didn't know what viral meant, but from his joy, I guessed it was something good. The next morning, people were already waiting by my stall before I arrived. Some came from other neighborhoods, some from far towns. They wanted Lulama's herbal tea. They wanted to meet the grandma who refused to give up. My table wasn't enough anymore. Patrick helped me build a small wooden counter. The shelter manager, who once rolled her eyes at my herbs drying by the window, suddenly smiled at me every day, within a month. I had enough savings to rent the small storage room beside the shelter, the one that used to be filled with old mattresses and dust. I scrubbed it clean with my own hands, hung strings of dried herbs on the walls, and painted the door yellow. When I opened it, I felt something deep inside me say, "You're home again." People called it Moyo's Corner. I didn't correct them, because that's what it was, a corner of my heart turned outward. Every evening, as the sun dipped low, I would sit outside and watch people sip what I had made. Young couples, students, tired workers, they all came with different stories, but they all left a little lighter. Sometimes I'd see women staring at me, women my age, with a look I understood too well, a look that said, "You survived what I couldn't." And to them, I'd whisper, "You still can." Of course, not everything was soft and perfect. There were days when my back ached so badly I could barely lift the kettle. Days when I saw Thandi's face on a magazine cover, smiling beside her husband in front of a glass house. Days when jealousy crawled up my throat like smoke. But then I'd remind myself, peace is not about forgetting pain. It's about learning how to brew it slow until it no longer burns. Then one afternoon, something happened that made my hands tremble again, but not from fear. A silver car pulled up near my shop. The window rolled down, and there she was, Thandi, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She stepped out slowly, as if the ground might reject her. People turned their heads. They could see she wasn't just anyone. She looked at me and whispered, "Mama." The word cut through the air like glass. I stood there, my apron still tied, herbs still in my hands. For a second, I was back in that kitchen, the day she left me. But this time I didn't feel small. I felt steady. She said she wanted to talk. I told her to sit. I poured her a cup of tea, the same one she'd once called old-fashioned. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "I made mistakes," she said. "I thought success meant forgetting where I came from." Her hands shook as she added, "I lost the house, Mama. He left me." And for a moment, I saw not the woman who abandoned me, but the little girl who used to hold my skirt when she was scared of thunder. I didn't say, "I told you so." I didn't need to. I just handed her the cup and said, "This tea, it forgives better than I do." That night, after she left, I sat in the quiet and realized something powerful. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sips quietly. It looks like peace when someone expects you to hate them. It looks like success that doesn't need to shout, because the sweetest revenge isn't destroying those who hurt you. It's building a life so peaceful that they can't understand how you survived without them. When I closed my shop that evening, the last rays of sun touched my hands, the same hands that once begged, cooked, and cried. Now they built, they healed, they remembered, and as I locked the yellow door, I whispered to the night, "They left me at a shelter, but I built a world right next door." Have you ever forgiven someone, not because they deserved peace, but because you finally did? People talk about healing as if it's gentle, like warm sunlight on a quiet day. But the truth is, healing burns first. It burns through pride, through bitterness, through every why me that you've whispered into your pillow. And once it's done burning, only peace remains. Good evening, my dear listeners. It's Lulama again. I wonder, where are you listening from tonight? What does the air smell like where you are? Because here, the wind smells like dried mango and lemongrass, and the streets outside my little shop are humming with life. The same streets that once forgot me, now whisper my name. It's been 3 years since I opened Moyo's Corner. What began as a tiny stall beside the shelter has now grown into a small building of its own. There's a kitchen where we dry and mix the herbs, a counter where customers laugh and sip, and a shelf full of colorful jars, hibiscus, mint, ginger, dried orange, rose petals. Everything made with my hands, and my story. When people walk in now, they don't see an old woman who was left behind. They see a brand, a name whispered with respect. And yet, even in all that, I make sure the sign outside still says the same thing. From my heart to yours. Because that's all I ever had to give. My heart. The fame came slowly, like sunrise through fog. First, a few loyal customers, then local journalists, then tourists. Tariq came back one day, smiling, and said, "You're everywhere online, Mama Lulama. People call you the Queen of Calm." I laughed. If only they knew how loud my storms once were. But the real miracle wasn't fame. It was what happened inside me. For the first time in decades, I felt light. I no longer needed to prove my worth to anyone. I just was, and that kind of peace, oh, it scared me. Because I had never known life could be this quiet, this steady. Then one morning, something happened that told me life wasn't done teaching me lessons. The doorbell rang as I was restocking the jars. When I looked up, I saw her again, Thandi. This time she didn't come in a car. She walked slowly, her shoulders drooped, her clothes simple. She looked older, smaller, as if life had humbled her in ways no punishment could. I wiped my hands on my apron and waited. She stepped closer and said softly, "I didn't come for money, Mama. I came for forgiveness." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The air felt thick, heavy with memories. I thought of the day she left me at the shelter, how her eyes refused to meet mine, how the van door closed between us like a coffin lid. That memory still lived inside me, sharp and cold. But standing there, I also saw something else. Her trembling hands, her swollen eyes, the weight she carried. And I realized maybe fate had already punished her more than I ever could. "Sit down," I said quietly. She hesitated. I added, "It's still your mother's shop, even if you forgot it for a while." She sat. I poured her tea, the same blend I used to make when she was a child. The smell of lemongrass filled the room, wrapping around us like time itself, folding back. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "I lost everything," she whispered. "The house, the car, the friends. When he left me, no one came to help. I finally understood what I did to you." Tears slid down her cheeks, falling into her cup like tiny apologies. And for the first time in years, I reached across the table and held her hand. Her fingers were cold. Mine were steady. "Thandi," I said softly, "you don't have to be perfect to come home." She looked at me, confused. I smiled. "You only need to be honest." She broke down completely then, sobbing, apologizing, calling me Mama over and over like a lost child. The other customers quietly stepped out, leaving us alone in that yellow-walled shop filled with the smell of forgiveness. That night, after she left, I sat in silence and thought about what life had done. It had taken everything from me, my dignity, my home, my family, only to return it when I no longer needed it to feel complete. That's what fate does. It waits until you stop begging for what's gone, and then gives you something better. The next week, Thandi came again, this time with Sibusiso. He had grown taller, his smile brighter than ever. They both offered to help in the shop. At first I resisted. I told them, "This business was born from loneliness. I'm not sure it will recognize you." But Sibusiso just laughed and said, "Then we'll reintroduce ourselves." So they stayed. Thandi began handling accounts. She'd been good with numbers, always had. And Sibu helped run the online orders. I watched them day after day, working quietly, learning humility in the same walls that once smelled of my tears. The shelter still stood across the road. Sometimes I'd see new faces there, old men, frightened women, abandoned souls. So I started something new. Every Sunday I'd brew big pots of tea and take them there. No charge, just warmth, because I knew what that kind of place did to a heart. People began calling me Mama Moyo in the neighborhood, not as pity, but as respect. Shopkeepers would wave, children would bring empty jars asking for refills. One afternoon, a local newspaper printed a headline, "From Shelter to Sanctuary, the woman who turned pain into purpose." I cut it out, framed it, and hung it beside the counter. Not to boast, but to remind myself of the road that led here. Then one evening, a black car pulled up outside again. But this time it wasn't Thandi. It was her ex-husband, the same man who once stood in my kitchen years ago, avoiding my eyes while my daughter abandoned me. He walked in, still in an expensive suit, but his face told another story, one of pride cracked by regret. He smiled stiffly. "I hear your tea has become quite the success." I nodded. "It has. Would you like to try some?" He hesitated, then said, "Actually, I came to talk about an investment. A possible expansion. You could take this nationwide." I looked at him, the man who once thought I wasn't worth his respect, and I almost laughed. But instead I said, "You see, this tea doesn't travel for profit. It travels through people, and I've already reached everywhere I needed to." He left quietly, probably not used to hearing no from someone he once pitied. And that was my moment of quiet revenge. Not loud, not cruel, just still, because there's nothing louder than a silence built from dignity. Weeks turned into months. Moyo's corner grew busier. We expanded to a second small location, managed by one of the younger women I'd met at the shelter. I made sure to hire others like me. Women's society had written off as too old, too broken, or too late. I told them, "You are not broken. You are just seasoned." One day, Thandi found an old photo of us, me holding her as a baby, standing beside the small house we used to live in. She looked at it for a long time, then said, "Mama, I wish I could go back." I smiled. "We don't go back, child. We just grow roots where we are." That evening, as we closed the shop, she hugged me, truly hugged me, for the first time since she was a teenager. She whispered, "Thank you for not hating me." And I whispered back, "Thank you for coming home." Now, some nights, when I sit alone in the quiet, I look across the road at the shelter. The lights there flicker, the wind hums through the fence, and I remember that frightened woman who once begged God to end her story. If I could speak to her now, I'd tell her, "Don't be afraid. The hands that life broke will one day build something beautiful." Because they did. My hands built more than a business. They built a bridge between shame and peace, between loss and love, between a mother and a daughter. And that, my dear listeners, is why I tell you, never believe the chapter you're in is the whole book. Sometimes the plot twist is you. When the world throws you away, pick yourself up, even if it's just one handful of herbs at a time. When people mock your dreams, keep working quietly. The day will come when their laughter turns into questions. And when life brings back those who broke you, don't give them revenge. Give them tea, because nothing confuses guilt like kindness. Tonight, as I close my shop, the moon hangs over the street like a gentle witness. I hear the distant sound of laughter from inside, smell the sweetness of hibiscus in the air, and I smile. Because once I had nothing but pain, now I have peace, and peace, my friends, is the most profitable business of all. They left me at a shelter, but fate built my empire right next door.